You're clearly lost. The cafeteria's on the other side, he said, not even looking up from his clipboard. I wasn't wearing scrubs or a visitor's badge, but I was holding a stethoscope, standing by the ICU entrance, and apparently being black was enough to make me invisible. My name is Kiera Henderson. I was 22 years old when I stepped into that sterile-smelling, fluorescent-lit building, heart pounding with hope and nerves. I had just been accepted into one of the most competitive internship programs in the country, Ansel Medical Center's elite summer rotation. It was a place my mother once called the diamond of public care. Back then, I didn't know she meant that literally. Dr. Walter Greaves, director of residency programs, was infamous in the academic medicine circles. Silver hair combed too neatly, thin lips always pursed, he was known for setting a high bar, a bar which mysteriously tilted depending on your skin color or zip code. The moment he saw me, his brows tightened, as if the sight of my braids was somehow a personal inconvenience. "You here for maintenance?" he asked. "No, sir. I'm on the new interns. Kiera Henderson." I offer my hand. He looked at it like it carried disease. "Right. From through Equity program, yes." There was no such thing. I got on merit, but in his eyes, I'd already been filed under diversity hire. During that first week, I did everything right. I arrived before everyone. I stayed late, cleaned up charts no one asked me to, shadowed emergency cases through the night. And still, Dr. Greaves managed to make me feel like a trespasser. "I hope you understand," he told me while I triple-checked vitals for a trauma case. "This program isn't about giving out gold stars for effort. We expect precision." I nodded silently. He didn't say that to the two white guys who almost mislabeled a medication tray that morning. But things didn't stop at the microaggressions. One day, I overheard him speaking to another attending, his voice not even lowered. "Honestly, I don't know how long we're going to keep accepting these experiments. They're not cut out for this level of medicine." I stood around the corner, clutching a folder so hard the plastic cracked. He wasn't even trying to whisper. Well, I told my roommate, Naomi, also black, also an S-team, she said, record everything. Not just in your phone, in your performance too. They can twist words, but they can't erase your results. So I kept pushing. I intubated faster than anyone in our group. I diagnosed a rare arrhythmia during rounds that even stunned the residents. I wrote reports so detailed that nurses started asking me for clarification. And yet every time I passed Dr. Greaves, I felt his eyes stripping away every one of my accomplishments. Until one morning, everything shifted. There was a commotion in the ER, a VIP emergency case. No one was saying names, but I could hear whispers. Board meeting paused, founder's office mobilized, family member critical condition. Dr. Greaves walked in, pale as I'd ever seen him. "Where's the cardiology resident?" he barked. "They're all upstairs," someone said. The intern Kiera was the first one on scene. He blinked. I was already by the bed, reading the ECG, spotting the ST elevation that screamed impending doom. The woman on the table was unconscious, but familiar. Her name? Margaret Brooks. That's when I remember the stories. My mom, late at night, would tell me about the woman who co-founded Street Ansel with a dream that poor and wealthy patients alike would share a hallway, a standard of care and dignity. Her name had changed after marriage. Margaret Brooks used to be Margaret Henderson, my grandmother. The moment I stabilized her and issued the call for cath lab prep, Dr. Greaves finally approached, his face unreadable. "You know her?" he asked, trying to sound neutral. I nodded. "She's my grandmother." His throat moved. No words. For the next 24 hours, I didn't sleep. I stayed in that hospital as Margaret went through angioplasty, sedation, and recovery. When she opened her eyes, she looked straight at me and smiled. "I knew you'd find your way here," she said. Her voice was weak, but her pride undeniable. Later, she requested a wheelchair and asked to be taken to the director's office. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just said, "I want to speak to the young woman who saved my life and remind this institution who built it." By the end of that week, posters lined the hallways. Henderson Scholarship Fund launches for underrepresented medical students. Below it, a photo of me, stethoscope in hand. Dr. Greaves? Transferred. Quietly. No press release. No farewell. But I heard he ended up at a much smaller clinic. And me? I became the youngest chief intern in program history. Not because I wanted to prove a point, but because my grandmother's dream wasn't finished and now. It was mine too. The first few days after my grandmother was discharged felt like living in a dream someone else wrote for me. People who barely glanced at me before were suddenly nodding in the hallway. Attending physicians who once forgot my name now asked me to assist with complex procedures. I even caught one of the interns, Mark, the golden boy from Connecticut, repeating something I'd said during rounds as if it were his own idea. But the difference now was someone corrected him. Actually, Kiera mentioned that exact hypothesis yesterday. "You weren't paying attention," Dr. Sue said, her voice dry but clear. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt angry. Not at Dr. Sue or even Mark. At the system. At the way perception shifted only when they saw me not as Kiera, the black girl from Baltimore, but Kiera, the granddaughter of a woman with a building named after her. The mask was still on, just gilded now. I called my mom that night. She was silent for a while after I told her everything. Then she said, "Be careful, baby. They'll smile wider when they feel threatened." I didn't understand what she meant until the sabotage began. It started with minor things. My patient files missing from the shared drive. Lab results that never made it to my tablet. I double-checked everything and still got blamed when a post-op update wasn't presented on time. Disorganized, Greaves' replacement muttered during our weekly review. "Sharp girl, but needs structure." Her name was Dr. Lorraine Kessler. Younger than Greaves, smarter too, and infinitely more insidious. She smiled when she criticized you. Her compliments came laced with tiny barbs. Then came the medication incident. It was during a cardiac emergency. I'd prepped the correct dosage epinephrine, 1 milligram for push. But when the nurse opened the tray, the label read 10 milligrams, 10 times the dose. "Lethal. Did you draw this up?" Dr. Kessler asked calmly in front of the entire code team. "No." I triple-checked the tray before I stepped out. "Someone must have. No one else had access," she said, looking down her nose. "This could have killed someone." I was suspended from clinical duties for 2 days pending an internal review. That night, I broke down in the on-call room. Naomi came and found me there, still in my scrubs, shaking with fury and shame. "You think they're trying to push you out?" she asked. "I think they want me to quit so they don't have to be the ones to do it," I said. "And it's working." Naomi didn't say anything. She just pulled out her phone and showed me something. A video. It was from the hallway camera outside the supply room. It showed me entering the medication area at 2:14 p.m. and then another figure entering 5 minutes later. "Mark, the golden boy. You can't prove intent," she said softly. "But it's something." I sent the footage to HR anonymously. The next day, I was reinstated. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an email that said, "Administrative error resolved." And Mark? Transferred to another department within the week. Psychiatry, ironically. But the damage was done. My reputation was paper thin. A rumor here, a whisper there, nothing anyone could quote, but enough to cast doubt. Then, in my lowest moment, the unexpected happened. Grandma came back, not as a patient, but as a guest lecturer. The hospital invited her to speak at the Founders Day Symposium of PR Move, mostly. They needed to show the board that diversity and legacy mattered. I sat in the front row, heart pounding, as she wheeled herself onto the stage. She didn't talk about herself. She talked about the other Hendersons, the janitor who kept the ER floors spotless during flu season, the nurse who worked overtime because the dialysis unit was short-staffed, and the intermujo saved her life without knowing she was family. When the applause died down, she looked straight at Dr. Kessler and said, "There's more to potential than a resume, and there's more to leadership than what you say during rounds." Dr. Kessler smiled, but it looked brittle. That same afternoon, I received an email. Kiera Henderson has been nominated for the Resident Medical Excellence Award. I wanted to feel joy. I wanted to believe it was genuine. But something told me I was still being played. I needed to know more about the board, about Grandma, about why no one had known we were related. So I asked. That weekend, I drove to her house, modest, brick, filled with plants and light. She brewed tea the way she always had, adding 2 sprigs of mint and 1 drop of honey. "You never told them you were a Henderson," she said quietly. "I figured you had your reasons. I didn't think it mattered. I wanted to earn it on my own." Grandma smiled. "That's why you do deserve it." "But baby, this system wasn't built to be fair. That's why I tried to build something different. And they tried to erase that too." She told me things I didn't know, about how she and Dr. Malcolm Ng founded the center together in the 70s, turning a derelict clinic into a place of dignity and care. How her name was removed from key documents after she retired. How men like Greaves made sure she was remembered as a co-chair instead of the visionary. "You want to change things?" she asked. "Then don't just survive them. Expose them." The next day, I submitted my application for the Medical Ethics Fellowship. I included everything, not just test scores and accolades, but a personal essay. In it, I wrote about the patient who almost died because someone swapped a label. I wrote about whispers in hallways and doors that stayed shut. I wrote about legacy not as a gift, but a responsibility. 3 weeks later, I was called into Dr. Kessler's office. She didn't look up when I walked in, just slid a folder across the desk. "I've read your statement. So has the board." And I asked, "You're a liability." I blinked. "Excuse me. You could have taken the award and smiled for the camera. But now, you're forcing us to review our internal processes, disciplinary protocols, and security audits. You've made enemies." I stood. I didn't make enemies. I revealed them. She looked at me for the first time. "You'll never get a residency here. You know that, right?" I smiled. That was never the goal. That evening, I got the call. The Harvard Medical Ethics Fellowship. Full ride. Prestigious. Competitive. I was one of 3 selected nationwide. When I walked through the hospital for the last time, I didn't do a victory lap. I stopped by the ICU, the cramped break room where I had once cried into my sleeve. Then I walked to the founder's wall. Someone had added a new plaque. Margaret Henderson, co-founder, visionary, and advocate for equitable care. Underneath, in smaller script, dedicated by her granddaughter, Kiera Henderson, who reminded this hospital what its heart looks like. That's when I finally let the tears fall. Not for what I endured, but for what I reclaimed. Harvard was different. Not in the way people romanticize it with ivy-covered walls and whispered brilliance in the air, but in its expectations. Here, I wasn't a symbol or a scandal. I was a scholar. And for the first time, I felt like I could finally exhale. The fellowship started with intensity. My cohort included a law graduate from Georgetown, a former military medic, and a biologist who'd left her research at Stanford to focus on human rights and medicine. Every conversation felt like it mattered. Every seminar peeled back another layer of the system we all knew was broken. One of the first courses was titled Institutional Silence: How Systems Protect Themselves. It might as well have been written about Street Anselm. I gave a presentation on medical retaliation, framing it through my own experience without naming names. I talked about what it meant to work twice as hard to be seen as half as capable. how policies meant to promote inclusion were often deployed as shields to hide discrimination. After class, a professor pulled me aside. "You ever consider publishing this?" she asked. "It's not just theory, it's testimony." That night, I started writing not just an essay, but a full thesis. I titled it "The Scalpel and the Veil: How Racism Hides Behind the Language of Professionalism in Medicine." The more I wrote, the angrier I got. Not because I was bitter, but because the patterns were so clear, the excuses so rehearsed, and the consequences so devastating. Minorities in medicine weren't just underrepresented, they were underprotected, isolated, gaslit. One chapter focused on performance reviews. I requested anonymized data from various institutions. The language used to describe white interns versus black ones was staggeringly different. White interns were driven, needing polish. Black interns were eager, but inconsistent. White interns were assertive. Black ones were aggressive. It was the same old code, written in clean fonts and stapled by HR. Another chapter focused on retaliation. I traced policies that allowed faculty to flag students anonymously, even without investigation. Guess who got flagged most? But the final chapter was personal. I wrote about my grandmother, about the erasure of her name, about how institutions rewrite history, not by lying but by omitting. The thesis spread like wildfire. Harvard published it in their Journal of Medical Ethics. Then the New England Journal picked it up for commentary. I was invited to panels, interviews, and podcasts. Suddenly, I was no longer the girl who got sabotaged. I was the voice exposing systemic rot. And then came the email. From Street Anselm. Subject line: Invitation to speak at Founders Legacy Week. I stared at it for 10 minutes. It felt like a dare. I forwarded it to Grandma. Her reply was 2 words: do it. So I went. I didn't wear white that day. I wore deep navy blue-like armor. I stood on the same stage where she once sat in her wheelchair and made the walls shake with dignity. Now it was my turn. "Thank you," I began, "for inviting me back. I was once told I didn't belong here, that my presence was the result of an equity initiative, not earned. I was told through words and silences that I wasn't cut out for this level of medicine." The room was silent. And yet, I stand here today as the author of a thesis read in every major medical school in the country. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted the truth to matter again. I paused. I'm not here to accept your validation. I'm here to challenge your memory. Gasps. Then murmurs. This hospital was founded by Margaret Henderson and Dr. Malcolm Ing. Their names, both names, should be etched in every room where healing happens. Not as decoration, as acknowledgement. I pulled out a plaque from my bag, unveiled it. The Henderson Patient Dignity Wing, rededicated July 2025. For those who were once silenced and those who refused to stay silent. I placed it on the podium. This is not a request. This is a restoration. No applause. Not at first. Then someone stood. A young black nurse. She clapped slowly. Then others joined. The room cracked open like dawn. After the speech, a member of the board approached me. "We'd like to name a scholarship after you," he said. "The Kiera Henderson Future Healers Grant." I looked him in the eye. "Only if it comes with mentorship, housing stipends, and protection from academic retaliation. Otherwise, it's just a headline." He blinked. "We could discuss terms. I'll send you the contract. My lawyer will co-sign." Because that's the truth they never expect. When you survive the system, you don't just get out, you come back holding a mirror. That night, Grandma and I sat on her porch, listening to cicadas and drinking sweet tea. "You changed things," she said. "No, you did. I just lit the torch you handed me." She smiled. "Well, hold it steady, baby. There's more ground to cover." And there was. The next year, I launched an initiative called Surgeons Circling, a national mentorship network for underrepresented med students, pairing them with practicing professionals who had walked the same hard roads. We raised over $2 million in our first fundraiser. Hospitals signed on. Schools adopted the curriculum. I became the youngest Black woman to keynote at the National Association of Medical Ethics, and the first to name names on that stage. But the most powerful moment came when I received a letter. Handwritten, no return address. It read, I was a nurse on call that night when a medication label got switched. I was afraid to speak, afraid I'd lose my job. I watched you get blamed, and I said nothing. I'm sorry, but watching you rise gave me courage. I've started documenting everything, and I've joined your mentorship program. Thank you for showing us how to fight back with integrity. No signature, but I didn't need one. This was the win. Not the title, not the press, but the quiet revolution of people who finally felt seen. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every Black girl with a stethoscope and a fire in her chest. To every intern who smiled through humiliation, hoping one day they'd be allowed to matter. To every legacy erased in the name of professionalism. I was no longer the girl who got mocked in a hallway. I was the woman who made the hallway wider so others could walk through it with their heads held high. 3 years later, I returned to St. Anselm not as a student, not even as a guest, but as a co-chair of its first ever Equity and Ethics Medical Board. The irony wasn't lost on me. This time, I walked through the front lobby with my white coat open and my badge clipped proudly to my collar. It didn't just say Dr. Kiera Henderson, Maryland, MBI also had a small gold pin beneath it. Founder's Legacy Advocate. The halls had changed, not just in signage or policy, but in faces. More Black and brown interns. More women in surgical programs. A transgender medical student led morning grand rounds. An older Latina nurse now sat on the hiring panel. What once was whispered in break rooms was now discussed openly in forums and policy reviews. And yet, beneath the fresh coat of reform, some of the old rot still lingered in the walls. You could feel in the way some residents still avoided eye contact when race came up in case presentations. In the occasional passive-aggressive comments on evaluation forms, overly passionate, too focused on social issues, disruptive presence. That's why I came back, not to bask in legacy, but to hold the door open wider. One of my first initiatives as co-chair was simple transparency sessions. Monthly, voluntary but recorded discussions led by staff and trainees about bias, racism, and structural inequality in the clinical setting. No scripts, no slides, just truth. At the first one, I stood at the podium in front of 50 colleagues, many of whom were new faces. I was mocked in this hospital, I began. I was dismissed, labeled, and nearly sabotaged. I didn't speak then because I was afraid I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Silence. I'm speaking now because I know what silence costs us. A resident raised their hand. But how do we speak without being punished for it? The question hit deep. I responded, you document, you share, you build alliances with people who believe in accountability, not perfection. And when you're afraid, you speak anyway, because staying quiet won't save you. It only protects the system. I could see heads nodding, eyes meeting mine not with pity, but with understanding. And still, there were those who resisted. A month into the role, I sat across from a senior attending DR. Brewster, who had received multiple complaints of racially charged comments and dismissive behavior toward female interns. He leaned back in his chair and said, I think all this diversity stuff is making medicine too political. Back in my day, we focused on saving lives. I smiled tightly. And how many voices did your version of medicine silence along the way? He scoffed. We're doctors, not activists. No, I said calmly. We're humans first. And the moment you forget that, you stop being a doctor worth trusting. His report was sent to the disciplinary board. 2 months later, he retired. Some called it a win. I called it overdue. But the real victories were quieter. Like when a first-year med student stopped me in the hallway and said, "I used to think I didn't belong here. Then I read your story. Now I'm staying." Or when the board passed the patient respect protocol, which included immediate escalation for racial bias complaints, recorded resolution processes, and protection clauses for whistleblowers. Or when I met with a group of janitorial staff, many of them immigrants, heard how for the first time they were being invited to policy discussions that affected their safety and workload. I knew we hadn't fixed everything, but we were no longer pretending nothing was broken. And in the middle of all that, life happened. I fell in love. His name was Marcus, a trauma surgeon I met at a medical ethics conference in D.C. He was brilliant, humble, and annoyingly good at quoting Baldwin during arguments. We bonded over our shared anger and our shared hope. He once told me, "You don't just survive the fire, you carry it forward." We got married in the spring, under a blooming magnolia tree on Grandma's front lawn. She gave me her stethoscope as a wedding gift. "I don't need it anymore," she said, "but maybe you'll hand it to someone else someday." And maybe I would, because teaching became my next love. I started a seminar called Race, Medicine, and Memory, first at Harvard, then Yale, and eventually as a national webinar. We dissected case studies, historic injustices, and lived experiences. Students cried. Faculty wrestled with guilt. Progress creaked forward. And then something I never expected happened. St. Anselm offered me the role of chief medical officer. The offer letter was long, the salary impressive, the power immense. But I said no, because I didn't need to sit in the highest seat to make change. I asked them instead to fund a community health leadership fellowship with 10 full-time paid roles per year for BIPOC students focused on rebuilding trust between hospitals and marginalized communities. They said yes, and that was the better title. Years passed. Some wounds healed, others scarred over. But one thing remained constant: the work. Every time I watch a young Black woman step up to the podium, introduce herself as a future surgeon, and speak with the fire of someone who belonged, I remembered where this began. Not with being mocked, but with refusing to stay small. One day, while I was visiting Grandma, now in her 90s and still sharp as a blade, she handed me a box. Inside was a faded envelope. I opened it. Inside was a photo. It showed a much younger Margaret Henderson standing beside Dr. Malcolm Ng, both in lab coats, both beaming outside a newly opened building. On the back, in her handwriting, were the words, "We built this so you wouldn't have to start from scratch, but you still had to fight. I'm sorry for that, and so proud." I wept, because legacy isn't a building or a name on a plaque. Legacy is the fight you inherit and the future you demand. And my fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because for every institution that hides behind policy, there's a voice ready to tear the curtain down. For every young doctor told they don't belong, there's a place waiting for them to lead. And for every time someone mocks your presence, there will come a day they stand and applaud your truth. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.